And just
Okay, so we do like to capture these and we'll put it on our YouTube and share it with anybody who would like it, including the panelists, of course. So I'll start by introducing myself. I'm fairly new to the Women's Fund. I started in February. My name is Beth Thompson, and I am the Special Projects Manager, which means that I am doing and learning all kinds of things. So Real Talk is one of the new things that I'm working with, and I came to the Women's Fund by way of the Women's Policy Institute. The person, Suzanne, was in my class in 2021 through 2022. And Susan, you're an alumni the year before. Yep, Susan Killenberg is also an alumni. There's information over there if anyone is interested. The deadline is June 14th for this year's cohort. Last year's cohort that just graduated worked on expanding paid family leave and has been extremely successful in their endeavors so far. So I think there was 16 women did a fabulous job with that. So Women's Policy Institute is a really important part of the Women's Fund. And through that institute, people come together, women and men can join as well. It has always been women. It started in 2006, but men can participate as well. And it is a policy and advocacy training ground, 1 day a month for 9 months. And the group works on a bill together to create some change at the State House. So very much involved in what we're talking about tonight with gender bias in the media, because of course it's an election year and we want to see more women get into elected office. And we have not had the numbers that we should have in Rhode Island. So we do have a healthy General Assembly with about 40%, 43%, I believe, women in the General Assembly. But I'm pretty sure, and please correct me if I'm wrong, that the only mayor of a town of a significant size is Maria Rivera of Central Falls. And in our executive office is Sabina Matos as Lieutenant Governor. So 20%, 1 of 5. So we are working towards more equity. Women's Fund works towards that every day. And that's why we're here tonight to talk about what we can do, how to identify any kind of bias in the media, and what we can do to confront it or work against it. So we have 3 incredible women who've shared their time tonight. We have Nirva LaFortune and Valerie Endress and Alisha Pina. And I'm going to read their bios so I don't screw anything up. So Nirva is the Executive Director of City Year Providence and a Senior Vice President at City Year Inc. with over 20 years of experience in education, government relations, public policy, and community engagement. She was elected to the Providence City Council in 2017 and was the first Haitian American in Rhode Island to hold elective office. During her tenure, Nirva led initiatives like the COVID-19 Recovery and Resiliency Task Force, the citywide Behavioral Health Response Program, and policies for affordable housing, school support, safer communities, infrastructure investment, and small business growth. In 2022, Nirva became the first Black woman to run for mayor of Providence, inspiring others from underrepresented communities to engage in civic life. Round of applause for Nirva. Thank you for being with us. Valerie is in the middle, associate professor in the communication department at Rhode Island College. She teaches courses in the areas of rhetoric and social influence, political communication, campaign communication, leadership, gender and communication, and civic engagement. Her research and publications include such topics as presidential and campaign communication, gender and political influence, and citizen engagement. In addition to her teaching and research responsibilities, she serves as director of Rhode Island College's American Democracy Project, where she coordinates a large variety of campus and community civic engagement projects and forums. Furthermore, Endress serves as a political analyst during campaign season on NBC 10, Go Local Prov, and a variety of other media outlets. She's a Rhode Island political forecaster for national publications and a regular guest on Rethink the Week, a syndicated radio show about national politics. Thank you, Valerie, for being with us tonight. Welcome. Please feel free if you'd like any refreshments over on the side. And Alisha Pina is a curator of words, spoken, written, sung, and lived. The Rhode Island native is a national award-winning former Providence Journal reporter and a past communications director for the state of Rhode Island with nearly 30 years of marketing and communications experience. She launched her all-inclusive communications business, Inner Wingspan, at the start of 2022 and had instant success with clients of all sizes, including the Rhode Island Foundation, Langston Hughes Community Poetry Reading, Racial and Environmental Justice Committee, Women's Resource Center, Fab Newport, and the James Diosa for Treasurer campaign. So welcome again. Thank you, Carla. So we're going to start tonight. I would love to just go down and have each of our panelists speak from their own personal experience of their intersection with this topic as their lives have brought them to this idea of encountering some form of gender bias in the media.
I'll start.
Sure, thank you.
So, gender bias in the media as a woman, and also as a woman who has many intersectionalities within my own identity, being a woman, being an immigrant, being a Black woman, the gender bias, and also because of the intersectionalities of my identity, I cannot also forget the racism
Right.
that also exists within the media. Has certainly affected me in many ways. I think about how the media sometimes fails to really highlight women's experience and Black women's experiences in comparison to their male counterparts. You know, I think about when I was running for city council, there were many things that came up that I didn't have enough experience. I remember the media would do things, not some media outlets, not all, would shorten my bio, or there are certain questions that certain journalists or people who are interviewing would ask and would not ask, again, my male counterparts. Questions from what makes you qualified, right? Or questions that would come up around how are you going to take care of your children? Or other things that didn't seem always relevant, right, to the conversation. And I would find myself constantly redirecting,
right,
the dialogue that we would have to focus on the issues that are important to the people, and my ability to lead. You know, we don't always consider just the holistic experience that women bring to the table, whether it's professional experience, which I have. You know, I've been in higher education for almost over 20 years at this point. I actually was an assistant director to the Center for Public Policy at Drexel University. I've taught in higher education at Drexel. I hold a graduate degree from Brown in urban education policy. So my work has been in policy, whether it's creating policy and initiatives from marginalized young people so that we can create pathways in order for them to succeed and have access to fields in STEM or engineering or social sciences, to also serving on boards in advancing initiatives, as well as influencing policy that has developed. You know,
Can I interrupt and ask a quick question?
Yes.
So when you needed to redirect because a question seemed preposterous or unfair, how was that received by the person asking the question? Did it create another kind of dynamic?
It depends.
You know, like oh, geez, now she's difficult, or...
It depends on the person, it depends on the interviewer. You know, there were definitely people when they would ask questions, they would become quite intense and actually, to be frank, quite disrespectful. and condescending. And they would speak to you as if you don't know any better.
Yeah, and I think that's what I'm trying to ask is like, how do you manage that without it becoming a bigger problem?
Oh, well,
or a perceived bigger problem.
Perceived bigger problem. I am highly aware of my identity. And with that said, I am very mindful of the way I engage with people because I also don't want to fall into the trap in which they're trying to perpetuate this image of me that are stereotypical and negative stereotypes of Black people, Black women in particular. You also have people who question you if you're too polished, right?
Yes.
So there are things that have come up. I'm not Black enough, right? Yeah. Because of the way I speak.
Right.
Or she can't relate to us because she lives in a certain community. I'm from the South Side and West End of town. I worked really hard to get to where I am. So why should I be ashamed of that? So it's as if sometimes the media forces or helps condition our community or our society to place people in these boxes, right? And we're supposed to conform to these images or these perception that is created from us, for us. And once you step out of that perception, then you become a problem.
Right.
And I want to challenge those perceptions. I will say at times the pressure can force you to try to be or fall into this particular narrative or to try to be overly perfect. So you tend to forget a sense of self because you're trying to satisfy the needs or trying to meet these image that society tells you you should fit. But I've had to learn to redirect those conversations in a way where I am able to maintain my composure.
Right.
But also articulate what I'm trying to get across. You know, I've also, you know, there are times where I've been called that I'm trying, I think that I'm better, or what did someone say to me once? You are too
bourgeois.
Not bourgeois, I've heard that. Oh, I'm sorry, it's been a long day as well. That you're too, oh my goodness, the word I'm looking for, it's right on the tip of my tongue. Basically, I am someone who is deeply connected to my values. I will not pursue anything that does not align with my values. My father's a deacon. Both my parents were missionaries for over 40 years. My great aunt was a nun in Haiti. All my great aunts on my father's side, and she was Mother Superior, and she spoke 7 languages and did missionary work throughout the world. And so there's these set of values that are instilled in me. And I carry those values in everything that I do. And so at times there's this perception that you think you're better than everyone else.
Like a high and mighty.
Or high and mighty, exactly. But self-righteous, yes.
Yeah. Because you come across as someone with a very strong ethical compass.
Yes.
And people can interpret that in a different way.
Exactly. But also part of that, as a woman and as a Black woman, I don't have as much room for error as everyone else.
No.
The stakes are much higher for me, or were higher for me, and for all women, and particularly women of marginalized identities, and especially for Black women who are in these positions or who are pursuing these positions, the expectation is significantly higher. So there are things that my male opponents or counterparts might get away with that I cannot. And so I have to be prepared. I have to know what I'm talking about. I have to be able to answer the right questions. I have to present myself like I'm perfect, but we all know there's no one that's perfect in the world, right? I watch the president often, and he stumbles all the time when he speaks. There are times I cringe when he speaks, but yet he's given a pass.
Right.
And we also live in a society in which elected someone who was demeaning towards women, who was sexist, racist, and who caused such divisive mindsets and was just so problematic. And people still elected this person and gave them a pass. But yet, if a woman were to do those same things, if a Black or brown woman was to do those same things, they would not get away with it.
Right.
And so
Kamala Harris is a good example.
Kamala Harris is a perfect example. She is one of the most qualified, qualified people. She should have been the governor of, of Georgia. I mean, she could be president of the United States. But again, she did not win that election. And what I think is also, and during her, that second cycle when she ran for governor, I was also running for mayor. So I felt like I read all her books. They were like my guide.
You're talking about Stacey Abrams.
Stacey Abrams, not Kamala Harris. Oh my goodness, Stacey Abrams. I'm so sorry. I've had a long day.
That's okay.
Stacey Abrams. But Stacey Abrams, and yes, and to Kamala Harris's point, there are times when she's been in public and she stumbled, and the comments, and the way that the media, I mean, just destroys her. It's quite disheartening. But Stacey Abrams, she should have been the governor, and just her level of professionalism, her wisdom, the way she's able to eloquently speak about a multitude of issues. I've never seen it in my lifetime before. And yet she was judged, and there are still critics to this day who still think she's not good enough.
Right.
And so, as a woman running for office, it's really important that you prepare yourself not only, for the race, but you have to mentally prepare yourself to run, because if you don't, you can easily be dissuaded from your path, or you can start to believe that you aren't good enough.
Right.
And it's not true.
Right.
Because there are so many people who have run for office, particularly men, who don't have any type of experience, who've never held public office, who've never created any type of policy. I mean, I think about myself when I ran for mayor. I'm the only person who held elected office. I'm the only person who created policy. Out of both of my opponents, I served in city government the longest, right? As a city councilor, but yet I wasn't good enough. And I still remember someone telling me that perhaps I should put out my resume, like send something out and attach my resume. I've never seen that done before in politics. So that I can continue to prove that I have the experience to pursue this opportunity. And so, and just going back to even like the media, there was a photo that came out when I was running, and all my my peers or my counterparts, they had these beautiful professional like profile, and the photo that the Projo chose of me was in the mid, I don't even know where they captured the photo. I was like in mid-sentence of, I don't know, a conversation, a dialogue, and you can tell I was passionately speaking about something. But it perpetuated this angry Black woman persona. And they refused to change that photo. I had photographers who've worked with the Projo who have photographed me, and they were texting me photos that they've taken of me. And they're like, I don't understand why they didn't choose this picture. And it was the editors that chose that photograph, not the journalists. And they also refused to apologize. And so, the media plays such a significant role in shaping our mindsets, in informing us, and, you know, perpetuating various perceptions of things. And what they did was harmful.
Sure.
And I also think that the media understands that they have this level of power. And part of the challenge is also that we don't have a lot of diversity in media as well, so that people can actually tell the story in such an authentic way and can connect to the individuals who are in these positions, and not exploit them, right? But tell it in a way that also captures like their overall experience, makes them who they are, and provides them the skills, the knowledge they need to be successful in this role.
Right.
You know, I'm a mom. I've overseen budgets. I've built programs. I've passed policy. You know, I've had to have difficult conversations. I've had to make difficult decisions. Today, just today in my office, I had to make a major difficult decision and navigate those conversations and create a structure to move my organization forward. But we still have to prove ourselves. And if we don't have a media outlet that does a better job in telling the story, and not just selling a story to attract more readers, we're going to continue to see the wrong people in positions of power making decisions that impact everyone, particularly those who are most vulnerable.
Of course. Thank you.
Welcome.
Valerie, my question was again, how do you intersect with this conversation, your background that brings you here?
Okay. I'm going to start from the beginning. And when I went to college in the 1970s, I was a political science major for one semester until a political science professor, who they were all male at the time, told me that political science is moving towards statistics and I probably don't belong in political science anymore. And I looked around and all my peers were male. And so I became a communication, major, and became a professor in political communication because I could still study politics. But the reason I never ran for public office is probably I checked the box on all 26 reasons why, and there's that many reasons why women don't. So what I have done, and I think it was a good choice, is to study politics, and I look at a lot of times the intersection between politics and gender, and so I want to highlight a couple of things. I brought my notes to keep me focused. So I guess I could talk about this all night. But I want to pick up on a couple of things that Nirva said that I think are particularly important. And that is that the biases that journalists have are also there because the public has those same biases. Sure. And so it's only natural that they're going to follow along with that. And so what we know about voters' views is that they find women to be more compassionate and honest, and those are good traits. But for men, they find them more competent and knowledgeable, and that trumps compassion and honesty. And so they do believe that men are better suited 20 or 70% to 30%. And those numbers grow worse at the local level than they do at the national level. So as a result, and they have expectations, and they believe that women are most competent when they're talking about female-based issues. And that would be education versus terrorism. And that's part of the reason why Hillary Clinton had so many problems.
Bold difference.
Yes. And if you think of it, they drug Hillary Clinton to the Benghazi hearings for God knows how many hours, because it was a woman talking about issues in which men. And I would defy that as a Secretary of State, that a male would have had that same kind of scrutiny. And so women are expected to talk about issues of sexual violence, teen pregnancy, pay equity, daycare, all important issues, right? Healthcare, elderly housing, but when they divert from that, and also when they become and talk about policies because they actually have policies, like Nirva is talking about, um, uh, that's when the doubts come in that they know what they're talking about or they're qualified. And part of the problem comes in, and Alicia's probably going to talk about campaigning too, is that in a campaign, women, the most effective way, for example, in a political ad is to go negative against your opponent. But women are perceived more negatively when they go negative. And that's a problem. And what it brings up for both the public and I would suspect for the media is that they're unfeminine, that they're shrill, they're vicious, they're strident, they're a bitch, they're a witch. And I will say that Gina Raimondo has been called every single one of those names. And most female leaders have. And so you have that tremendous bias going into this. Where I do practice politics is that I'm less so in the last several years because of my commitments at work, is punditry. And that is being called in to talk about particular issues with the media. And I will tell you that I have engaged in punditry for about 20 years. And I have never been in a situation where I was on a panel with another woman. Never.
Wow.
And I do a weekly syndicated radio show in which I am the only woman. I don't appear a couple times a month. I don't do it weekly. And I believe I am the only woman, and the host is a woman. And so there's this issue about, first of all, thinking about expertise and being able to, and for the same reasons that women don't run for political office, they don't think they're qualified to be pundits, and neither do members of the media. And you know, I loved Bill Rappley when he worked for Channel 10, God rest his soul. But I remember that I was covering Chafee's inauguration, and we were up on a platform outside, and the male counterpart was called Doctor, and I do have a PhD, and I was Miss Endress the entire time. And so I think that says it all, right? And to be able to do so. And I've been in situations where members of the media will call upon me and I'll say, I know nothing about that issue. And they say, yeah, we need a woman on this issue, and to be able to talk. And so listen, you know, there's a lot of work out there for women who want to be pundits, but I want to talk a little bit about the importance of punditry too, and certainly members of the media and political reporters are incredibly important, but so are pundits, you know, and you know, you look in any one month and you look at cable television, there's nearly 700 pundits, and we don't experience politics except on the very basic local level, but through other people, right? It's through the media that we experience politics, or we learn about the candidates and things like that. So if you don't have women talking on television or to the Pro Joe or wherever about candidates who are running for office, then you're not going to get the same kind of fair treatment for women candidates. Now, one of the things that I've engaged in is looking at the research on news coverage. And one of the things that I find is that women are treated more negatively. They tend to focus on their personal appearance. They tend to focus on their life, their children. They tend to focus on their husband. When we have had who ran with Walter Mondale, a female, Geraldine Ferrara. They focused more on her husband than they did her. And so they're least likely to ask them about their policy positions. The coverage is less favorable. It's harsher for women, and the research shows this on the local level, on the statewide level, and on the national level. And they receive less coverage, and so they're much more likely not to be covered. So in that way, it's like I said, they're not focusing on the policies as well. But one of the things that we do know is that female journalists, probably through identification in some ways, tend to be fairer to women. And so that's a call, which I know all three of us will have, that we know we need more female journalists, and we can talk about that a little bit later. The last thing that I wanted to just touch upon here, and Nirva brought this up as well, and she's talking about, and she's absolutely right. Is it more difficult for a woman of color or a diverse candidate? Yes, it is, as opposed to a white woman. And we had a talk yesterday, and one of the things that I said is that race trumps gender. And so she will be most identified by her race rather than her gender, but the two cumulatively puts her even lower on the hierarchy. Now, there's another problem with that I just want to mention, and I think it's a really important one. And that is, when you're the only woman who's a pundit, or you're the only woman who's a journalist or a diverse journalist, if you're the only woman who's running for office who's diverse, then what kicks in is this notion about tokenism. And what happens there is that Alisha and Nirva represent all diverse women, and they screw up, then they're not going to give anybody else a chance. So when you are the only woman in that particular position, the judgment will be much harsher on you, but the other part of it is that all eyes will be on you. And that's what keeps diverse women from putting themselves out there in public, because everybody is waiting to see if those stereotypes will kick in, right? And for that reason, it becomes even more difficult to run.
It's really a ridiculous scenario.
Yeah.
I mean, it's a ridiculous scenario. And what I always find interesting is that our men, and particularly our white men, will make bad decisions. Like we elected a white male who decided that they weren't going to pay into the city budget, the city pension system, and that has led us where we are today. But yet we continue to elect them, right? To represent our city. We've had presidents that have taken us to unnecessary wars, but yet we continue to elect them. And so it goes back to the point that they're not held at the same level, as women, and particularly Black and brown women, or women of a marginalized identity. Excuse me.
Oh, sorry.
And it's not just politics.
No, and it's hard to every facet of society. The level, because the level is absurd. The standard is something we can't even quite put words to, because it is preposterous.
And in most organizations, this happens. And so Alisha is absolutely right about that. If you think about the female candidates who ran in the last presidential election, and there were 7 to start with, which was a record number, every single one of them was accused of not getting along with their campaign team and being vicious and nasty and
overbearing
and everything else. And if you've ever been in a campaign with a white male, notice that for all the men that ran, they didn't talk about how nice they were to their campaign workers, right? And to their top operatives. So you see that, and this also happens organizationally. You take that to the corporate environment as well.
Yeah. Or nonprofit environment.
No,
or any
place of leadership.
Yes. Yeah.
Go ahead, Alisha.
So let me start by saying journalism is so important and a necessary lens, and not defending journalism per se, but it's needed. And there's not enough funding into it. It is why you see the Providence Journal, when I started there, had over 100 reporters and several reporters of color. When I left in 2017, I was the last Black reporter they have hired, and they have not hired one since. And I think I was that Black reporter, the one, the only, for a good 5, 6, 7 years before I left. So that is troubling, but there is no investment in journalism as much as it was before, and that's problematic. There's also a lack of having not only women reporters and reporters of color, but there's also all the way up the chain. So as Nirva said, the reporters aren't the one that chooses the pictures. The reporters aren't the one that chooses the headlines. The reporters are not the one that decide what goes in the paper. And I can tell from a journalistic point of view, that one intersection that starts me here, I fought for stories for communities of color, for proper journalism, for Race in Rhode Island, the series that I was most known for. I had to get another white reporter to help pitch it in order for that Race in Rhode Island series to even come to existence and then win a national award. I actually submitted it myself, paid the fee for it to compete for a national award. And then they weren't going to send me to the journal, to the award ceremony, because they didn't think I was going to win. And we were going to win. So we did a bake sale in front of the journal to send me to the award ceremony. So I can tell you. And then they said, we'll help pay for it, because they didn't want the embarrassment, because I was standing out there.
Alisha.
And Alisha to end up, the ABGJ Awards. And we won. And then they put a big splash that we won. I did take that award with me, even though it was a journalism award for the whole paper. I took that bad boy. It was the first thing I packed when I left. So I think journalism, definitely, there's so many facets to it, but I want to say, as Ms. Nirva and Dr. Valerie have said, there are biases everywhere. There are race biases, there are gender biases, there are age biases. That's why I wore sneakers today, because I'm trying to stand in my truth. And it took me 46 years to learn how to speak comfortably in my own skin because of all of those biases, because I'm constantly trying to strive beyond the limits that everybody tries to put you in. And so now I say I'm a boxless, multi-hyphenate talent. So it is wonderful to be in this place, but I do campaigns and have been in the journalism world and have been in state government, and then wrote about all of that. So I feel like my intersectionality is everywhere. And I'm a Black female, and I'm born and raised in Rhode Island. So I care so much about the end result of our state, that now my business solely helps communities of color and equity and businesses and women and men who believe in equity and align with my thoughts of equity and culture is important. It's an asset, not a hindrance. So the biases are so rampant in our world. I won't even say just our country or our state. And so that fight is both a burden and a weight, but also a privilege. So I don't mind being the first and only because I want to shatter that for everybody else after me, but I feel it. And so I think, you know, this, I don't want to, you know, with all these burnt out reporters, I mean, there's less than a dozen at the Journal now. And so I can see why steps are missed, but I can also see that some of those are deliberate, some of them are societal, some of them are unconscious.
Right.
And there's teaching to be had that I'm not sure happens everywhere, from person to person, from company to company, from career to career. And I think that is some of the solutions that we can get into for this. I know we teach new candidates all the things, and they have those courses. There should be one for journalism, right, when they're covering politics, because there's storytelling that's missing. There's gaps. The same question should be asked to everyone. Sandra Cano was probably the most one that came up to mind when somebody asked me to speak on this panel. They asked her when she was running for Congressional District 1, because she just had a baby boy, and they said, are you going to be able to handle family? And, you know, everybody knows she's with Treasurer Diosa, and she said, did you ask Treasurer Diosa that when he was running for treasurer? And that was not asked. And I watched it with Nirva, and I watched it with April Brown when I ran her council race, and it was relentless, the questions being different from male versus female. And I think there should be a set of questions. And yes, I'm an organic reporter, so I ask questions as a person gives an answer. But I'm also thoughtful enough and know my own biases and my own flaws. That's why I say I'm flawsome, to know enough to ask and make sure I come back around and say, am I saying these questions because of me, because of society, because of the person, because of the candidate? But I take that time. If you are already burnt out and you are already trying to hit another level, or you're being disrespected at your job as a reporter, then that will be skipped. And there's a thoughtfulness that I took with every single story. There was a care that came with writing every single story. And to this day, I still use that with everything I do. And I don't think all reporters have that same mentality. And that's unfortunate, but it can be taught, but it takes honesty.
Alisha, can you start us off with that, moving into how do we identify it for the regular person, either watching a pundit, watching a debate, reading an article, listening to the radio? How do we see here the bias occurring? So if a journalist is not doing due diligence, is not being intentional, nor the editor, how do we as the audience identify the bias?
Well, I think it comes with the writing, right? But it also comes with the venue you're in. Because you could be at the State House and you'll see all the reporters up at the front. You'll see one female, maybe, Kathy Gregg, and then you'll see Ian Donis, Dan McGowan, and Ted Nesi. You know, the same ones. They're white men. They're beautiful journalists. Dan is probably one of the ones that's a little more thoughtful. Love them. But that right there is kind of the starting point, right? You don't have enough. There's no equality there. But depending on the venue, Anastasia Williams is was very dynamic every time she stood up to speak, and she always came off as the stereotype that everybody would say, angry Black woman, because of how she spoke, but it was more passion. Now, granted, I have my issues with some of the decisions she made, but it's the venue, it's the fight when you have to speak. So I think you could see that, right? But as a reporter, you need to see that. And you need to balance that with your writing. And you know, and those are code words. They always say we're passionate because that's their way of saying it in a more subtle way. And it's like, nah, yo, like, when are you gonna say that about the guy who got up and started screaming and started the fight in the State House the other day? Would you say that to that person? But you were easy to call the person passionate. So I think when reporters start to describe the person rather than the issue, that's a first clear sign. The picture choice. I love it. They all take pictures that are behind the flag. There was no reason to pull, and Anastasia is my example today. There was so many pictures of Anastasia looking angry, and they would pick that every time they would put hers in. But I know every single General Assembly member has the same picture behind the flag. Use that one. Be safe.
That's right.
If you have to be safe, then be safe. In this culture, in this day and age, just be safe. That's also a sign. Headlines, if it's not on the subject and it's more on the person, then that might be a sign that there's going to be a bias in there. And you'll see that a lot with women running for office. They will stay more on the person's character and their upbringing and their experience and their family, but you'll see less on this. They'll try to make it so it's at least 2 paragraphs each, but you see there's different stuff in the paragraphs. That's another clear sign. So, and I could go on and on about different newspapers. I try not to generalize, but there are some newspapers that shouldn't even call themselves newspapers here in Rhode Island that do it every single time and insert themselves.
I think something Valerie said, you know, that there are not many, very few women pundits. It seems like, and this might be a misperception on my brain, but it seems like our world of news gathering has moved to listening to pundits rather than reading journalism.
Which is a problem too.
Right. So you get your favorite pundits and you tune into that channel, and that's what you're being fed day after day after day, rather than a variety of voices in journalism, as journalism has, and papers.
And in some ways, it's an easy way to fill space, right? And it's a cheaper way to fill space. When you can't afford a journalist,
for sure,
you can have a pundit come in for free. And so you do.
And for ratings then, because this is TV,
and if you can get them to fight and argue,
there's some hot topic they want to talk about that isn't generally about policy. And that can look very bad on women.
That's right. That's right. I mean, all you have to do is tune into Fox News, but on the other hand, you tune into MSNBC and you're going to see the same kinds of gender bias. And it's across the board. But one thing that Alisha said too is you can identify that in some of our local papers. I will tell you that the research says you will also identify it in the Washington Post and the New York Times in how they cover female candidates, and as early as this year. And so you have to keep that in mind.
And I will tell you, from a campaign perspective, for the campaigns I've been on, there was a different strategy depending on both the reporter and the publication. Because we knew certain ways. And because I had lived and breathed it, I kind of trusted some reporters, knew who was the thoughtful ones, knew who was doing things for the right, knew who the sensationalized people were, knew who I said, you have to give us the questions in advance. And we will send them back to you and we won't talk to you anymore. Because we had to draw a line.
And control the script.
And I'm not saying we're controlling the narrative, but in a way, we're trying to control our story for our candidate. And that matters in politics because they will paint whatever they think is the thread that's going to get them the most views, the most reads, sometimes.
And there's this really subtle thing that can happen too. When a woman talks about policy, then sometimes that's rather an unrealistic choice, right? And so if you're talking about housing, for example, and they'll say, well, that's just impossible. The state legislature can't afford that.
Oh, yes.
And
they just kind of shut down the conversation.
So it comes with commentary that very subtly says that this person doesn't know what they're talking about. They're naive, they're inexperienced. And that's very seldom said of men when they choose to talk about policy. So when even women focus on policy, which they do in equal amounts to males, their policy is most often criticized.
Unless it's in an area that they think is what a woman has an expertise.
Child care.
Family, child care, paid leave, elder care.
But as those topics become part of the national forum, like healthcare, then suddenly they lose their expertise. So it's tied to how dominant that particular area is. So if you look at housing in Rhode Island, that's one of the chief issues, right? But there were lots of women talking about it, including Nirva, talking about it before then. Then it switches over to a men's topic. Yes. And then it becomes the men's topic. Right? When it becomes
no filter anymore. This is wonderful being your own boss.
So, it's I want to make one point, but to that point around housing, what's interesting is that not only did I talk about it while I was running in my mayoral election, I actually introduced a policy around housing, a very comprehensive policy to increase affordable housing options. And what was interesting when I introduced that policy, the then council president, and this might be in public record because it was during a public meeting, did ask me who helped me with this policy. So it was an issue that I talked about and wrote out a way for us to fund developing more affordable housing in our city. Now, I wanted to go back to a point. First, I wanted to share, a lot of times women also have to be strategic about the issues that they talk about because they also want to relate to their key audience. And it's really important, and it is a campaign strategy. And so if you are trying to get more women voters, or your group of like your top kind of group that you want to get buy-in from, whether it's moms, et cetera, it is a strategy to talk about key issues that directly impact them. But to, your point and the points that we've talked about, sometimes when you focus on some of those issues, there's an assumption that you don't know much about the other issues. And it's more so of trying to relate to the people that you're talking to. And when men talk about those issues, people are impressed.
They're perceived as more qualified. That's the other side of it. So if a man talks about housing,
yes, and women are perceived to be limited in their expertise on issues, which I also find quite problematic. The other thing I wanted to touch upon is something that you said earlier, and Alisha, you got me to think about this a bit more about kind of what are some things that we can do. And something you mentioned, Dr. Valerie, the bias that journalists have, and I'm paraphrasing, are the same bias or aligned with the bias of the people, right? Or the public. I also wonder if the bias that journalists have also are connected to how they're trained to be journalists in the schools that they attend.
Of course.
I went to Temple University. My undergraduate degree is in communication. As you were speaking, I started thinking a bit about how many female professors I had in my department. The three professors that I had, none of them were full-time staff members or faculty in the school. One professor, she was brilliant. Like she was an executive for like multiple media outlets. And was working as an executive in one of the top media outlets in Philadelphia. We had one professor who was a journalist in Philadelphia. And then I had another really amazing professor who was a postdoc. But most of my comps professor or journalism professors were white men. And then some of the classes that I took out, the classes around race and media. So I did take a race and media class. That was one of maybe two Black professors or professors of color that I had, and that course was an elective. It wasn't one of the required courses. So I also think that our institutions have to do better in terms of thinking about their curriculum and making it more inclusive. They also have to hire more diverse professors, women and people of color. I remember I went to see, so in Philadelphia, there's the Black Star Film Festival, and there was a professor that made this documentary around about getting tenured as a Black woman and the challenges Black women have, and all these stereotypes are also, professors also have to navigate those. Women professors, professors of color, especially as they're pursuing their tenure. And you know, we see such a small percentage. We've seen an incline of women, particularly women of color, particularly, again, Black women getting their PhDs. But when you look at that in comparison to how many of them are getting full-time faculty positions at universities or are tenured professors, that number is very low, and women in general. And so our institutions also have to make critical investments in shifting the way that they've been teaching or even the professors that they've had. If you have a professor in journalism and communication who has not been able to keep up with the evolving with our evolving society. And they're still teaching the same concepts they were teaching in 1965 or 1970.
When Projo had 100 reporters.
Exactly. And none of them were people of color. That's problematic. So we also have to hold our institutions accountable in preparing these people who are going to tell these stories that will frame our public's perception.
And also there's a whole notion that it's very easy for higher ed institutions to say, well, no Black women applied. And that's a huge pipeline issue. That starts inside the classroom.
That's right. That's right.
And encouraging Black women, for example, to go on and go into journalism and those kinds of things so that they can enter the pipeline to go to graduate school, to be able to teach. Because one of the things that we know is there's a direct relationship to students being able to identify with a particular topic when they are looking at somebody who looks like them. You know, Rick, for example, is now an HSI institution. We have a sizable number of students of color. Overall, I can count on maybe one hand and part of my second hand for nearly 250 professors, how many of them are diverse. So there you go, right? And we're not serving, to be an HSI institution as 25% of our student body who are served by a Hispanic professor, then I'm talking about part of one hand. To be able to do so. And so there's this, and also in the newsroom, right? To have mentors in the newsroom who look like you makes a huge difference. And to be in the political arena with the political operatives that look like you. So every time you stand up in the State House and you speak, you, again, that tokenism will kick in.
There are systematic flaws all the way through the pipelines.
Right,
sure.
So you could find instances on every one. I've actually been pretty spoiled because when I went to Boston University, there was professors of color, females, and they were the Globe professors too. And so I was prepped in a way that helped me come to the journal. And then the journal had Black reporters, teamed you up with a Black reporter, and she was female, Karen Davis, and she was wonderful. But then they just saw it with every new boss, new company that bought us, and buyouts and layoffs, and it would just dwindled and dwindled, and then I was last one standing. And it was unfortunate. And now I try to pass that torch by speaking at colleges, by teaching a course. I taught writing for justice at Youth Build last year. It both almost killed me and helped me. Because you just want to help so many, and you just couldn't do it in the 12 weeks I had. But it nearly broke me, but it also was a reward because you're speaking life and you're showing them somebody that looks like them that's been successful.
Right. Yeah.
And it's so necessary.
It is.
Yeah. And may I add also, I'm a multi-language speaker. We also need more multi-language speaking, writing people in the media. Because we're also in this evolving world that we're living in, people come from diverse backgrounds and they speak more than one language. And so that information also has to be accessible to all people. And it's not always accessible.
Right.
And we have to do a better job in, these media outlets in terms of even how they post information on their social medias, to do it in more than one language.
That's right. So important.
Yeah. And so it's really important for us, we really need to restructure the way media, the structure of media that exists today is not reflective of the society that depends on it.
Yes.
And so there needs to be a significant shift. And we have a pipeline issue, so we need to cultivate a pipeline that can help with that shift, right? Or that can work in that new structure. But we also need our media and publications to invest in making that change. And what I also think is a bit challenging now, what we're seeing is a lot of these corporate entities are buying up these media outlets. And so the focus, it seems like it's not always about telling a quality story or providing important information so that people can make sound decisions. But it's more about those catchy headlines and selling something that attracts people to want to read about it. But there's no meat to it. There's no depth. And I want to see more storytelling. Despite what the Projo did, I'm a subscriber. Because you know why? I believe in journalism.
And there's still great journalists there.
Yes.
Just not enough. And I will tell you a good example. After the picture issue with Nirva, one of the responsibilities I felt when I left the journal, I got criticized. You're the last Black reporter. You need to help get our story out there. And I had to make the choice for me, and I prayed on it. But I recognized afterwards that I still had an opportunity to influence journalism. So when the story with Nirva and the picture came out, Amy Russo was the new Providence reporter.
And she's one of the amazing ones.
Yeah, she just left out of journalism. But April Brown was running against Juan Pichardo for Ward 9 in Providence City Council. And she wanted to do a picture of all the Black women running for office. I knew the journal had an issue with the picture. I pitched Amy and said, I'm gonna let you come to this event because I want you to see all these beautiful Black women, and I think you'll do the story right. but I personally called her. I didn't pitch it. I didn't write a press release like I normally should do as a campaign person. I pitched it to the one I knew that would do it right. And it was funny, there was 12 to 15 Black women there, Henry's, all of them, and Althea, and it was really cool. And Amy comes in, she's never been probably with this many Black women in one room, and we're at the State House taking pictures, sun's going down, and one of the Black women said, what you running for, girl? They just thought she was light-skinned, and it was really cool too to see her eyes pop up. But it was such a learning moment. And I said, if all reporters could come with that spirit of drop the thoughts of what's going to happen, and just write the story. And I gave her that opportunity. I loved the story, loved the pictures. And I thought it was a place for them to maybe say something. I gave them an opportunity to talk about the picture issue and apologize. They didn't. But it was like, here's my part. I'm going to at least try to show this other side. And then she went to each one and asked them why you were running and what's the importance of this picture and why. And I thought every single reporter should have been there, but I knew not everyone was going to write it well. And so I asked her to do it.
That's a big loss for the Projo.
It is
a significant loss.
But it's those type of opportunities are also learning lessons. I would love to go and speak when they do the candidates thing, the women's voters do the candidates thing, because there's certain things, and you don't have to answer every question that a reporter asks. And there are ways to pivot a conversation when it's going not on the policy and the subject. And that comes with people who've been through it, such as Miss Nirva.
And also with the pipeline, having mentors of other women who have done this around you in government. So you can learn from people who have succeeded in getting elected and have happily stayed there, you know. Before we're out of time, I want to open it up for any questions that anyone has thought of tonight before we're going to call it a night. Yes, please.
Nirva, I have a very strong memory, and I'm wondering if anybody else can speak on this of I don't remember whether it was one of the mayoral debates or it was something that was on Zoom. And one of them tried to take credit for one of your pieces of work. I don't know if you remember, and I don't remember exactly what it was, but you had to speak up and say, wait a second, like, no, I did that. And I'm wondering if that is something that has come up for anyone else. It probably happens so much you don't even remember.
Exactly. It's not the shame of that, right? Like it's commonplace. Like someone saying, who helped you create this?
Or someone, speaking to someone, something, and you're like, wait, I like stood up, like I stayed up all night doing research and you know what's interesting? Even when I was in city council, the policy director who was there, who's no longer working for the city, I'll never forget, he told me, he's like, I really enjoy working with you. And because I had this whole structure, we had a shared folder, I would do research, had my points, outline a draft. And he, this person was a lawyer by training, so would do kind of the legal research and do some additional research to see if this would happen. So I was very involved in the policy that was created. I'm also a bit of a nerd, so that excites me. And also, what's really important to me is there are a lot of times when people create policy, but they don't think about the implications of that policy, and how it can be implemented, or the implications on various groups, right? And so I've always gotten excited, but I've been in situations, and I know other women in leadership positions have been in the same situation where they've worked on something and someone just so casually takes credit for their work, and people believe it. In fact, there was something else that I did, and literally it was almost like they were talking about it. I read something and I'm like, this is all my work. It's like they copied and paste and maybe change a couple of things to make it theirs. And so it happens often, and that is not something that's unique to me.
And it's not unique to most women of color. And in campaign and communications, you are the back. So they may be all my talking points. But I'm taking on that role and I understand that. But if I was running for office, these are my words.
Right.
And my comms person is there to help finesse, help with strategy, but they're still my words, right? But I know at the Journal, and when I was there was a lot of things that I let other people take credit as long as it got in. I had to make a judgment call. Do I need the limelight of it?
Right.
Or does it need to go in for the sake of community, for the sake of advancing journalism? And I think we make those decisions as women of color, every day when we make these judgment calls. Do I need to speak? Do I need to speak now? Does it need to be said by me at all? And there's those men, we're talking to gender bias, may not have to make as many decisions as we do when it comes to those things. And because we're judged harsher, we're held to a higher standard, we're paid less. That's all statistically true. And it's how do you deal with it as a person and your weight and role in the community. And you have to, I literally pray for about 2 hours every day now on how I'm going to do my best for community and still stay intact as a person. And I don't think that happens all the time.
For those of you who have been tracking the arc, the trajectory of women running for political office, how have you seen it change? Have you seen it get any better? A lot of this discussion tonight has been wonderful but exhausting because we were talking about the Geraldine Ferraro election, which was 40 years ago. And honestly, it doesn't sound all that different from the elections that we see today.
For Hillary Clinton.
For Hillary Clinton. Has it gotten any better? Is there any hope on the horizon?
Well, the numbers have improved. And where we're seeing some differences is at the state legislature level. Well, we were for a while, but what's happened is that state legislatures have gone red, and they've gone red mostly with white males. And so we've seen that change over time. But people will say that 40% is really healthy. And Beth, you said
healthy,
that, but that's
not great.
That's I want to make that distinction. That's still not representative of the population in which they are representing. But the problem still is that, and again, it's another pipeline that you need elementary school teachers who are women talking about politics, right? And in the middle school and in the high school and about sciences and things like that, so that women feel comfortable and their male peers do as well. And we're almost to a point in college, and I'm from a school where the women far outnumber the men at Rick. And one of the things is that men are now just getting comfortable with seeing women as their peers. And then that translates over to the workplace. Because if you look at it and you look at professional men, up until about the 1990s, they were marrying their high school sweethearts. They were not marrying their peers in college because there weren't enough women in college at that time. And now they're starting to recognize them as peers. And the same thing happens in the State House, right? And the younger men are much more likely to accept women as their peers, but the older men are not. And some of the recommendations are that the political leaders have to be the mentors of women and to be able to do that, but yet they're reluctant to do so because mentorship also reflects on the mentor himself. I'm going to use that pronoun intentionally. And it means that I'm going to pick a white male to mentor, because that person is much more likely to be successful, right? And so we see political leaders taking white males under their wing rather than females. So there has to be this system of mentorship, but that's a burden too, to all the women who are in the minority, to be able to mentor, or if you're in the press room in the Projo, and Alisha feels the burden that she needs to mentor women, and particularly women of color. But mentorship is probably the quickest way to be able to get there. So we're seeing generational shifts over time, but it's going to take a long time. And it starts with that professional connection in college in a lot of ways.
Can I leave on a positive note? So Secretary of State Amore has a civics program where there's 2 high school students at every single high school in the state come to the civics program. There are so many women and men in that program, and they start them out young, and they're in the schools all the time. They're in the middle schools all the time.
That's right.
So if I can leave you with anything, my steps are promote that, invest in that. If you have children and kids in the neighborhood, take them out with you. If you're gonna campaign for somebody, let them see it early. Involve them early. Put the sign out in your lawn and leave it there. Like, have the conversations. There are things you can do as a person, is talk about it more, invest in the right things. Because you cannot control what journalism does, but if you see something, say it.
That's right.
Because if enough people say it, maybe it will leave an impact on those. And I'm not saying de-invest, I'm just saying say it. Because they need your investment, but they also need your voice, and your voice matters and is necessary. And so I wanted to leave with that. That's because there really are great programs out there that are trying to put civics in and make it more at the forefront, and maybe make it mandatory in middle school, and then build on it in high school.
And may I add, as we're waiting for our young people to pursue these opportunities, you know, and to your point, my daughters started knocking on doors with me since, I mean, she was in pre-K. My son, I still remember bringing him to see Barack Obama, and we stood in line, and that was the first time I've ever, like, and I became a citizen actually right before his election. That was in what, 2008? Yeah. So in 2007, I want to say, or 2006, that's when I became a US citizen, the end of 2006. And so I still remember like being active. But I also want to say that as we're waiting for our young people to be ready to run for these higher offices, it's also important for us to invest in organizations like the Women's Fund, like Higher Height. They are amongst others, right? I'm just naming, you know, a local one and a national one that, you know, in Higher Heights really focuses on people of color, and they've done an exceptional job in really advancing women of color, Black women, in elected office, and they focus on state and national elections, nationwide elections. Those are amazing organizations through like some of the resources that they have, the training, opportunities to connect with people for that important, necessary mentorship. So we also need to support those organizations, particularly those local organizations, because I do want to see more people of diverse backgrounds running at the state level, at, you know, the national level, but also locally. Because someone has to decide how much funding is, like has to like make a decision and vote on the infrastructure funding that directly impacts the school buildings or the rec centers or that their children go to, or the streets that you drive, because I'm sure many people are sick of potholes. You know, amongst other things. So it's really important to also support these local, those organizations, both locally and nationally.
That is where we're seeing a higher percentage of women too. Not necessarily in you're looking at the smaller towns, women of color, but you are seeing an influx of leadership too. Town council presidents, city council presidents, things like that. So Rhode Island has a better track record there nationally than
Other places, yeah.
other places. Yeah.
I just want to say thank you so much, because I take notes on my phone, so I was like, yeah, you guys said so many like great catchphrases and like things to like really take away from this, each of you.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you very, very much.
It's my pleasure.
It's been a really good conversation. I appreciate it. Thank you for being with us. Nirva left materials over there also about City Year, and there's women's fun materials, and there's food if you would like anything to take with you or to eat here. And I do just want to point out one of the documents that the Women's Fund creates, and it's kind of hot off the presses, is a census of Rhode Island directors, board of directors, and CEOs. And there's a lot of good stats in there about how women are represented, not represented, and how the BIPOC community has slid backwards since COVID. Women in the BIPOC community.
Rhode Island Foundation teaches a course for one to be on a board, the things you can expect.
Yes.
To try to increase both board members of color and female.
Yes.
So please check that out.
So please take any materials over there. Yes, and thank you for that, Alisha. And thank you, Alisha and Valerie and Nirva. It was wonderful. Thank you so much.
And thank you for moderating.
Happy to be here. Thank you. Yep, and we will post this recording if anyone would like to share it, probably by Monday. Thank you so much.
Don't tag any reporters.
I can look it up too.